Hello, my name is William. I'm on the product marketing team, and I'm here with Jen.
Hi.
And we were talking about how does software get delivered, or in other words, what is the software development lifecycle? When somebody has an idea for something, what are all the steps that needs to go through in order to build and deliver that software so that at the end of the cycle, you get a finished app that a consumer actually logs into and uses? So we thought we would record the discussion, and hopefully it's helpful for you. So at the start of what we call the SDLC, the software development lifecycle, or at GitLab, sometimes we call that the DevOps lifecycle, you have some type of project planning. Very often we call this agile project planning. Sometimes people will talk about portfolio management or program management. But in a nutshell, you are having some type of system where you are capturing ideas, prioritizing them, and planning when you will execute them. So in GitLab, this is the GitLab issues component of our product. And I wonder if I can even share my screen to walk through a particular project. I don't know if I have anything running live, but we could look, for example, at a demo I made at one point. And so here in GitLab, we have GitLab issues. And this is our agile project planning part of our software. So you can create a new issue, and this might be an idea like, build a feature to let people log in with Twitter, right? So this might be some kind of authentication issue. Today maybe they have to log in with username and password, but I want to be able to let them log in with social credentials. And so I would create an issue. I could add details here. I could add a milestone or an assignees. And I can have some commentary. So you and I could have discussion about this. I could tag you potentially.
J.L. Parker.
J.L. Parker. And I'm even wondering if I even made this project public or not. All that's to say is, here's where you could do collaboration. You could make this issue part of an epic, and an epic allows you to track a longer set of customer stories or a longer set of projects.
Mm-hmm.
And then you would prioritize these. So you would look at where are these issues in relation to each other, which ones do we want to work on for this milestone, and map those out. So that's the project planning part.
Yeah.
Once you have an issue, then you would assign it to an engineer, and they would go and do some development on that. And I wonder if even a better place for this to look at all these different components might even be GitLab itself. Oh, let me actually look at if I can find. We've got, this is actually a product. I forget what we even called it now. We used to call it GitLab CE. I think this is not a very exciting video now because I can't remember what the name of the project is. We used to call it GitLab EE and CE.
But then we changed all that.
Yeah. We in a great effort, we combined it into a single place. And unfortunately, it's just slipping my mind what the name of the project is. But if I look at some of the epics here, we might be able to get so this is, improved speed of CI pipeline execution is, potentially an epic, and there's some planning in here, and there's various issues assigned to this. It looks like most of these are on the backlog, so they have various milestones. In fact, so this is the project planning, and then you have an issue. So I just went from an epic to one of the issues in that epic. This is where it kind of defined what do we want to build for this particular feature. And then we want to start work on this. And in order to start work on this, we're going to create a merge request. And so here is a merge request that is going to be code that's written to build out this feature that was spec'd out during our planning phase. So this now comes into the the coding phase of the software development lifecycle, where actually I write the software.
And
So
it's all for GitLab itself, right?
So yeah, I'm doing this in a little bit of a meta fashion. So I'm showing you in GitLab where we write the software for the GitLab software itself.
So yeah. And my question is, when people use GitLab and they're writing the software for themselves for not GitLab, when the outcome isn't GitLab, because I'm used to it coming through and the solution, the outcome being GitLab.
Right. So this is the exact same process. So any of our customers like Ticketmaster, Jaguar Land Rover, Verizon Connect, they use GitLab issues to do that planning. And then they would create a merge request, and it would look something just like this, where they would say, this is the code I want to make in the merge request. And then they would actually, write some software, or I should say, write the actual code. And they would create a Git branch. They would write code on that branch, and then they would make a request to merge that branch into their master production or trunk branch. So here is the actual code that was written.
Got it.
You can see it's a part of this merge request. And then once you write the code, then you go through a process called code review. This is part of source code management, where different folks might, Camille makes a comment here, like, do we have a unit test for that? And is resolved by Lynn, probably because there is a unit test. So this is where other folks can go in and review the code, and you can have some discussion on, is this code ready to ship? In addition to that review, you also have some automated testing that happens, and that's what we call CI/CD.
Yeah.
So up here's the pipeline, and there's a series of jobs that run that will implement tests, unit tests and functional tests on this code. And some linting and things like that. And in this case, I don't think we're doing any type of what we call continuous delivery. I think in this case, the pipeline is just testing the code, and then our delivery process looks a little bit different. But in theory, somebody could use GitLab, or I should say many customers use GitLab, not only to automatically test their code, but to automatically deploy their code.
Yeah.
So once you've merged the code into your master branch, then you usually need to do something like create a release, or in the case of continuous delivery, you're just continuously deploying whatever's in master. Kind of two ways to do it. If you create a release, you have something that's usually called a build artifact, or a deployment artifact. And that means it takes that code and it packages it into something that you can install on a server. So this might be like a .exe file if it's a Windows server. Or it might be something like a .jar file if it's a Java application. These kinds of things. It packages it into some type of binary artifact that you can deploy. And then in the release process, you would take that artifact and actually deploy it onto a server. Now, GitLab can actually do this as well. GitLab, not only can the pipeline test your code, but the pipeline can package your code up, especially if it's a container that would run on Kubernetes. The packaging part would be taking the code and building it into a container. And the deployment part would be taking that container and to container image and deploying it onto Kubernetes, a Kubernetes cluster. And a Kubernetes cluster is just one type of infrastructure that you can run your application on. So every time you log into an app, whether it's like the Ticketmaster app or whether it's GitLab or Gmail, whatever it is, that that's running on a server somewhere.
Yeah.
And that could be a container running on the server. That could be a virtual machine running on a server, or it could literally be the application is physically installed on the server and you're accessing it over over a website. The other type of build artifact might be something like if you have a mobile application, your build artifact might be like the app itself, deployed as either like an iOS or an Android app, and then part of that deployment process would be uploading or sending that app to the App Store, right? So if it's like a mobile app, you would write the code, you merge the code, you package it up into like an iOS application that you then send to the App Store as the latest version. Yeah. And you could either download it from the App Store, or send folks a notification to update to the latest version, or if you do auto updates, that kind of a thing.
That makes sense.
So usually mobile apps, especially, and web apps usually have like a front end part and a back end, where the front end part is that app that's actually on your phone. But as you're interacting with that phone, it's usually communicating with like web services on the internet. So your account data is all stored on some server in the cloud. So some part of your deployment might be deploying the new mobile app, but part of your deployment might just be updating the server, with new functionality on the back end.
Yeah. So it's like our process.
What's that?
I was understanding what you were saying. It's fine. Saying it's two parts.
Yeah. So that's where you go through CI/CD, packaging and deployment. And then finally, when that application is running in production, you want to do some type of monitoring. You want to know, like, is my application up? Is it performing well? As requests are hitting my application, is it actually responding, or is it down? And that's the monitoring component. And GitLab also does some of that as well. It uses a tool called Prometheus, which is an open source project. We have an integration with Prometheus that does some monitoring. I realize I'm just showing the merge request here. I'll just stop sharing for a moment. That's kind of like, as you get to the end, when you're monitoring your application, it can send you alerts like, this application is getting a lot of 500 errors. It means the server is not responding. So then you get alerted and you say, okay, I need to go and fix that and do they call that an incident when there's something wrong with your application. And so incident management would be triaging, finding out what's wrong, and fixing it. And GitLab also has some capabilities for that. So that's kind of like across the whole, that's how software gets made. From the start, hey, I have an idea, project plan it, do the source code management, code review, continuously integration, continuous delivery, and monitoring.
Okay. And do you see any of it, like, so I know we can preview a lot of the text and stuff in GitLab. So when you're building it and delivering it, can you see any of it in GitLab as you're building the applications? Is that a stupid question?
No, that is a great question. So usually the way software development was done for a long time is you would have different environments where you deployed your application. So remember, when you packaged up your artifacts and deploy it, you wouldn't just do it once and deploy it straight to production. There could be something wrong. Yeah. So you tend to have, a lot of organizations have three environments: dev, stage, and prod. The development environment is a set of running servers or some property in the cloud that your developers can deploy into while they're working, right? Yeah. So they can kind of see what their code looks like, and only they have access to it. It tends to be a messy place because it's development. A lot of different people can change that environment, right? Mm-hmm. Then there's something called a staging environment. And the goal of staging is to be as close as possible to production, so that you deploy into staging so you can see what it's going to actually look like and how it'll behave before you actually send it live.
Yeah.
Now, GitLab has this feature that we call review apps. So essentially, a review app is a staging environment for every single branch. So when you create a merge request, you have a branch that you're requesting to merge that branch back into master. And GitLab can essentially go to Kubernetes and say, spin up a container to run just this code change as an environment, and then surface it via a web interface. So here's a URL where you can access this environment, and that's called a review app, where you can see just that change and basically like a real staging environment. This allows you to do things like user acceptance testing, which is saying, like, does the app behave the way I expected it to? You would normally do that in staging, but you can do it on GitLab on every single change in a review app.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so like when you go and so you do a lot of different projects and things. What kind of things are you building? Are you doing only GitLab, or are you creating all sorts of crazy apps and stuff?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I tend to mostly have demo projects. Mm-hmm. I'm actually looking now to see if to see kind of what projects I have created on GitLab. So in GitLab, a project is tends to be like a single application that you're going to deploy tends to be in one project. Mm-hmm. Although if you are an organization that uses something called a microservices architecture, which means instead of one big application, you've split it up into these little tiny applications that each do a certain thing. You could have like many, many, many projects that all build together to be one application. We call that microservices. And GitLab has some special features such as cross-project pipelines. This is a one pipeline that runs and deploys something, but it works across many projects. So you could use that with microservices. In my case, I don't think I have any microservices app. I have like a demo app here for like auto DevOps. So this was just literally the stock auto DevOps Ruby application. And then I think I connected a Kubernetes cluster to this, and just this is a demo to demo auto DevOps. I have a project for a CNCF webinar I did. This is a project for a talk I did at the Git Merge conference in 2018. Mm-hmm. And the name of my talk was Git for non-developers, or I think something like getting non-developers to use Git. And it was actually about this process, how like we have folks in marketing roles and they're using Git every day.
Where's that video?
I think I can shoot it over to you. So this was essentially what I did in order for this project. Actually, it's I wonder if this is still working. It totally is. That's awesome.
Look at that.
So this is, I used a project called reveal.js, I think. And this is a JavaScript that lets you build slides in JavaScript. And then I'm serving them using something called GitLab Pages, right?
Yeah.
So I'm using GitLab Pages to serve this content. So this is my slide deck from that talk. Mm-hmm. And rather than building the slide deck in like PowerPoint or Google Slides, I built it in code using this framework.
That template, right? Was it a template?
Yeah, it's you can think of it as it's a template of sorts, but it's I'm trying to think of which. I think this file. So essentially, the way that this framework works is you create a Markdown file, and so here's my Markdown file, and it makes slides out of that.
Oh, neat.
So that's how like these slides were built using this Markdown file. And so this was what I did was I put the project up on GitLab, and I said, hey, here's where my code is stored. If you want to see this as well, you can see the code here. I put resources from the talk. So this was kind of like, if you wanted to build this locally, I put some instructions here on how to, if you clone this to your local shell, using your local command line, which I think we've chatted about before.
Yeah.
You could, instead of running it from GitLab Pages, you could just run it locally with a Python server. So that's a few examples of some projects that I've created. Mostly demos. I make a lot of demos. That's kind of what I use GitLab for often. But there are other folks, other GitLabbers, or folks on the GitLab team that do demos and things like this, but they also might just have personal software projects. They're building a mobile app or they're building a web app.
Well, so my reason for asking is sort of twofold. One, the sentiment being that in order to be a GitLab team member, you have to have some basic understanding of Git, because as it was explained to me, it would be sort of like being part of the Ford Motor Company and not understanding the production line. To a degree. So I'm trying to go back and understand the GitLab Git basics for that. The second reason being part of my job description is curating peer reviews and putting them in a searchable, curatable place, and that I might actually need to figure out a way to put that somewhere in a searchable place, so I might actually benefit from learning how to code a little bit. So that was my twofold reason for asking.
Yeah, that's awesome. I would say, in my opinion, that the analogy would be, working at Ford, understanding how a assembly line works
Yeah.
is actually what we just talked about in this video. So that software delivery pipeline,
Yeah.
I think every GitLabber should understand it. It's actually why I said, hey, let's record this conversation, because I have it often.
Mm-hmm.
And, I only talked about Git like very, very little bit, but this is understanding that whole process of the process that software goes to. I do think that everybody should understand that.
I agree.
I would say understanding Git would kind of be more like, I'm working at Ford in the marketing or the sales department. Do I understand how to build an engine or a carburetor? Right? Like, yeah, there are engineers that build engines at Ford. And certainly if you understand how the engine is built, maybe you could sell it better, maybe you could market it better.
Yeah.
But that's kind of like, that's the level of understanding. All that's to say is I've been doing software marketing for a long time, and I do highly, highly recommend learning software development.
Mm-hmm.
I think that is like a very admirable goal. I don't think it's needed, but it is really, really helpful. And there are some great resources. Like, have you ever looked at like Code Academy or any of those kind of online courses?
No, but I would.
Yeah, so I'll send you some links, and if I can figure out how to do it, I'll put the links in the description of this YouTube video. But then really good resources if you just you're like, hey, I want to learn some programming. Code Academy is one that is really nice. Udacity is another one. That one's kind of a bit more involved. They have like longer courses. But yeah, basically you can learn a little bit of software development. In fact, Code Academy has some really nice courses for learning Git. It's one of the links that I recommend. If you just want to learn Git, do this Code Academy course. And it becomes really, really cool. I remember I probably first started learning the software development a long time ago. Sometime in the 90s, I wrote my first scripts in code. But when you actually build something and you can kind of see it running, it's a pretty cool feeling.
That's cool.
So yeah, I can share some of those resources.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you. And thank you for your time today. I feel like I reach out to you to ask these questions because you always give me very detailed, helpful answers. So thank you.
And thank you for being willing to record and kind of share with everybody else.
Always. I
Awesome.
really appreciate it. Much clearer.